So hello everyone and welcome to a DeanRamsden.com interview. I am your host Dean Ramsden, and today I am joined by the premier energy healer and energy healing teacher in the US, Reverend Rosalyn L. Bruyere. Rosaline is an internationally acclaimed healer, a clairvoyant, and a medicine woman. She is the originator of the whole body healing technique known as the chelation, as well as the brain balancing skill, and others. Rosaline teaches workshops and seminars alongside her husband, Ken Weintraub, in the US and internationally. Her collaborations with physicians and scientists reflect her belief that both healing and health should be a cooperative effort between patient, physician, and healer. In addition to her healing skills, Rosaline is committed to the learning, practicing, and to preserving ancient wisdom. And as she noted in our previous interview, she is a Christian pastor, along with her many other deeply held beliefs. So Rosaline, welcome. And as always, what a pleasure to talk to you today and hear what you have to say about the classical writers that you admire and who you recommend your students to read.
I'm happy to be here, and I'm certainly happy to talk about this. I think as I go forward as a teacher, and this will be my 50th year this year of doing this, I really miss the days when our students knew more about natural spiritual laws. I just miss them. We have so many students coming in from so many different places that have no spiritual training at all, or a very narrow spiritual training. Never occurred to them that spiritual training might be very similar from one tradition to another, because they might only know one, maybe two. I was so encouraged by my teachers to have a vast knowledge of what had gone before, because I didn't start my journey, in all truth, till 1971. But in 1971, there were still people alive who'd been through the 30s. There were still people alive who knew about World War I and what it did to Europe. There were still people alive that had read Blavatsky and Ledbetter and Alice Bailey. And, one of my favorite stories, I was at Menninger Clinic doing some research with Elmer Green, and we're all sitting around having lunch. And I said, Elmer, how did you meet your wife? And he said, I met her at an Alice Bailey conference in
my God.
And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm sitting here doing research with people that are enough older than me that they were actually in the same room as Alice Bailey. They were actually around Krishnamurti. They were, I barely met Krishnamurti before he died, because he was still very active here in California. So there's all these people that we all would have loved to have known. And the younger people have really only seen people that came much later and who stopped. I don't know what happened in America, but somewhere in the 1980s and 90s, people stopped referencing where they took things from. It was like they no longer footnoted anything.
I think you're making an excellent point, and I've certainly come across it myself, because the moment you stop referencing the past and the source material, you disconnect yourself from that past.
That's right.
You try to take on perhaps the authority of the information, but not having had the initiation that went into that.
That's right.
Getting that information. There's no lineage.
Yeah. It's something that you see, and I understand people wanting to own their own power, I guess is the right expression, but not at the loss of precious knowledge and having gleaned these things from people who had time and suffering. Right. I mean, my teachers suffered to give me what they gave me. They went through very hard times to keep true to the tradition. I've barely suffered at all for it compared to what they went through. I mean, probably I suffer more than the newer people do, but nothing like, the healers in America before my era. Many of them were arrested for doing this. Olga Worrell was jailed twice for being a healer, and that doesn't happen to us anymore. So I think people don't, if you don't have all that knowledge, you don't know what you're up against. And we have so many shallow, casual outrages being celebrated today instead of
the outrage culture.
Yeah, we're at the outrage stage, and it's just it's so not what I saw given to us. Our generation was given a great deal, and a great deal of hope and faith was put in us by all those elders who taught us. Ken and I always talk about it. We refer to the teachers that taught us when we were in our 20s as the blue-haired little old ladies, because back in the 50s in America, there was this fad where older women blued their hair so it didn't yellow. And so that's what we referred to them as these blue-haired little old ladies. And they were sweet and they were kind and they were positive. And when you were at your worst, you'd go and visit them, perhaps for a class, and they'd sit you down and make you tea and calm you down and get you to breathe. And then they'd teach you something once your mind was receptive. But they could read us as we walked in the door. And if we were in no state to learn, they made it so that we were in a state to learn. And that kind of graciousness seems to also be missing from what we're doing.
So in a tribal situation, these were the grandmothers, and maybe there's the occasional grandfather in there too that was passing on tribal wisdom to the younger generation. That piece was still in place in the U.S. at that time. Yeah.
Particularly, I was in a lot of spiritualist circles, and the spiritualists were they never said anything about something being ritualistic, because there was disagreement back in the 30s between the spiritualists and the theosophists, and the two of them kind of split apart. So the spiritualists never wanted to look like they had a ritual like the Crowley people or the Golden Dawn people, and they didn't want to look like they were being lofty the way the theosophists were. So they had other things that they thought didn't look ritualistic. But the ritual was you came in, you took your shoes off, you settled yourself down, you had tea, and you got your brain right before you took in a teaching. There was a fellowship in that. You became very close to your fellow students. They were your tribe and your family, and probably you told them things you would never tell a family member because you were just close from the heart opening that it made. There had to be a necessary heart opening for you to take in wisdom. What part of you is wise? Well, probably the heart, probably not always the brain. The brain's real involved in facts, it's not as involved in the feelings, and the heart's trying to reconcile that all the time. So what the spiritualists did was twofold, something that isn't done very much anymore. They would have contact with your dead relatives, giving you the rest of your family back, not the family that you were rebelling against, because I was in my 20s, so I still was.
Yes.
But the ones who had gone on and who were wishing me well and wishing me success and wishing me good fortune. That's something that you don't get in other circles. And then I ended up with all the Native Americans because I was a healer. And guess what they do? Come together, you pray to those relatives that are in the next dimension to come and help you.
Yes.
They do give messages through the shaman. So there's a whole process. The spiritualists and the native people were very close in America because they believed they had basically the same practices.
And it sounds
most people know that.
And it sounds as though both those traditions valued something which has always been a part of our culture as human beings. Both community and the connection to the ancestors of the past. Some of whom are old, still not quite ancestors, but can see the door, right?
Right.
And that there's that bridge between what has been or about to leave and current, what's real and what's present.
Right. So as I noticed, one of the funny things, I remember, we all have our notions about other people and something that you made up out of whole cloth often. I was on a reservation one time, and one of the native elders asked me if I'd read Alice Bailey. and I remember looking at this, it was an older man, and I said, actually, I own Alice Bailey, but no, I have not read her very thoroughly. And he said, oh, those are very good books. Talks all about medicine ways. And I went, Wow.
Recognition. recognition of a fellow ritual elder, but in a different tradition.
In a different tradition, yeah.
Alice Bailey is so readable. I picked up her copy of Treatise on Cosmic Fire and some of her other classics. So readable, and even by today's standards, I think. Accessible, very accessible.
I never thought she was. And then someone gave me a copy of Glamour, A World Problem, which is her treatise on ego. And I got very interested in that. And then somebody gave me the unfinished autobiography, which is something she wrote when she was very young. And it was very touching for me because I was a young housewife myself at the time. And she talked about reading her books by propping them on the end of her ironing board while she was ironing her children's clothing. And I thought, okay, I can cope with her. She's one of us. Because there are all the things that all the spiritual people I knew were doing, because we also had jobs and families and things to do. We did all those things. But in addition to that, if you wanted to read a spiritual book, you really kind of had to sneak it between other things. Your family, in all likelihood, didn't support much of it. At least that was my experience, that most of the people I knew had families that, why are you wasting your time with that? You know, when you could be ironing a shirt or whatever else they thought the house slave should be doing that day.
Well, you only have to read one sentence of Blavatsky to realize that an Alice Bailey or even an Annie Besant or Leadbeater are much preferable to our beloved HPD. I mean, Blavatsky's so difficult to wade through.
Oh, yeah, she's dense. She's dense. And, you know, the reason I got so hooked on Annie Besant, who's, you know, for all feminists, she's such a great icon of feminism. Very much so. Many people didn't know that about her. But she was this amazing spiritual woman who devoted her, she was married to a pastor. And once they separated and she went further into her own spiritual work and became involved with theosophy, she became so involved that she moved to India and founded a whole school and organization in Varanasi, which exists there to this day.
Yes.
And she was one of the suffragettes who marched in Paris and was arrested for it. So she did time, not for healing, for being a suffragette. I think there's a whole tradition of people that aren't a one-trick pony. You know, as I've traveled now through much of the world doing what I do, people are always very surprised if I talk about anything other than spirituality because they think you don't have time for anything else. Or maybe they're raised in a tradition like Catholicism where they think if you're in religious life, you're in a cloister somewhere where you don't do anything else. And none of that's true. It's not even true in the cloister.
It's impossible to review these classical books by famous teachers, famous authors, without taking the political concerns they were dealing with, the social changes they were dealing with into account. You have to have that context.
Well, Annie Besant was a promoter of the Irish separation, and she was also a promoter of home rule for India. So she was very much involved in the political movements of her day and on the radical end of them.
So it's not too surprising she got drawn into early theosophy, which is very much a socialist political view of the world religions. You know, it's making all religions equal and of equal opportunity for study.
Yeah.
Rather than the hierarchy and, you know, my hierarchy is better than your hierarchy.
Yes. And I think she was the first of the theosophical writers to write in a very straightforward, short sentence style. Bailey's got long sentences. Blavatsky has no sentences, only paragraphs with punctuation. I mean, it's all very wordy. Besant was very cut and dried. And then following in that same tradition, you have Dion Fortune, who is later, by 20 years.
Yes.
She's 20 years later. She enters the movement after the First World War, but before the Second World War. And what most people don't know about her, one of her great contributions to the spiritual world is the work she did during the Second World War spiritually to stop the Nazis from invading England. And she did long meditations and had large groups of people praying and doing wards to keep the Nazis from being able to ever invade England. And there are some funny films that have been made about that where they parody the magical people going out and fighting off submarines off the coast. And there's lots of things that refer back to it that's in the popular culture, and people don't realize that somebody was actually involved in all that. There's a wonderful book called The Battle of Britain, where it says what the meditation she had one week and what went on in the news that same week, and it's side by side all the way through the book. This is what happened in the war. This is the meditation we did. This is what happened. This is the meditation we did. And it's a beautiful manifestation, because one of the things we're moving away from, I think what we're going into is a relatively selfish age. So all the self-help books now are teaching people to get better for themselves, but they're not putting people together in groups to do good for everyone.
Right.
So this emphasis that used to be just part of Christian doctrine, where people prayed to keep hurricanes away and everything else, which still goes on in a lot of the traditional Christian congregations. But I think in the metaphysical world, if we're not careful, we're going to go back to a time where selflessness is no longer taught and selfishness starts to be approved of. At the same time you're approving of it, you're kind of shoving selflessness out the door.
Well, I wonder whether in addition to what you're saying, the impact of psychology on energy healing has encouraged that self-reflection over and above being of service to others.
Oh, I think it actually has. I've always thought that psychology and spirituality were a bad marriage, and the divorce is even worse. So, it's not like we can go back. We can't erase all the Freudians and their influence. I mean, there is nobody in the civilized world that doesn't know some notion of psychology, whether it's correct or not or accurate. We just have some notion of it. It's in film. It's in all the literature.
Yes.
It's in our common conversation. So we're not going to get rid of it. But where are the teachers that are going to teach us some humility, some service, some, have you noticed you feel better helping others than obsessing about yourself? Somebody had to tell me that, because, any of us that have our own psychological baggage, we all do, comes with the model, apparently, the human model.
Yes.
Somebody has to tell you, stop worrying about yourself all the time. Do something outside yourself and see what happens to yourself. That's the lesson I had to learn early on, because every time I had an emotional upset, a big one of some kind, because I'm a woman and I'm multiply married and I have grown children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. So I had a couple bumps in the road, right? So you go to a bump and then you start worrying about yourself and poor me and blah, 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 blah. I could break it every time somebody else had a problem, because I could immerse myself in helping someone else and then come back and go, well, that was easy. Now just do that for yourself.
Exactly.
And I could.
Yes.
I absolutely could. As soon as I'd help somebody else, I could help myself.
And of course, built into every major spiritual tradition is an act of service, an act of charity, where doing good works is equal to doing prayer.
Right.
But different but equal, and you need both in your life.
Yes. Prayer is not always seen as active, but if you're cleaning the wounds of a leper, that's a form of prayer. That's an act of contrition. It's an amazing process that you go into, because you're concentrating on somebody else's suffering. You actually have only one thing in your mind at that time. It's as good as meditation for a lot of people, and for some people it's the only meditation they can do. Or walking meditation, for instance. Sometimes that's what it takes. Give your body a monotonous task, walking, and then your brain finally clears itself out.
Yes.
And a lot of pilgrimages are like that. A lot of my German students make that pilgrimage through Spain.
Yes, it's supposed to be very powerful.
They come back just lit up. They are just amazingly changed from that. And of course, everybody along the way helps you, and everybody else along the way, both the pilgrims and the people who live in all those pilgrim sites, always prepared to help you. There's a pilgrimage like that in Japan also that goes. You probably remember the name of it. I never can remember the name of it.
There are several examples of this, and it's always built into the culture. It's always respected, and I think it also calls out of us a certain need to get out of our usual lives into a place where greater parts of ourselves can be activated and reflected by the kindness of others. Mm-hmm. Not just the occasional idiot or hostile person, but that, many people are good, kind people, and interacting with them and breaking open your preconception is part of the spiritual journey.
Yes.
Also, defending yourself against the exploitation is also a part of the spiritual journey, but, we need them both.
That's true. You just proved you were a Capricorn.
Capricorn with 3 planets, or is it 4 in Scorpio? So I'm a mess.
My goodness.
Yes,
well, I wouldn't say that you're a mess, but I would say that's a lot of winter influence on you that some of us don't have.
Yes.
That's fun.
So now I understand. Now I understand why I chose Besant with her activist leanings as one of your main people that you wanted to talk to, and then on the other side, Dion Fortune, both British but coming from 2 different parts of the culture. One heavily socialist, the other much more an occultist, symbolic, esoteric group orientated.
Yes, but also an icon of feminism. And that's because of her novels, The Sea Priestess and Moon Magic, I think that's the other one.
Oh, yes.
They're 2 companion novels, and they're all about the sea goddesses and the moon and all of those influences. And at first, when I was young and first found those books, she made me really angry. I started reading one of them, and I discovered that I hated all the characters. They were weak, they were cowardly, they were petty, and you have to read like 3 or 4 chapters before they start to transform and redeem themselves. And for an American reader, it's hard to wait 4 chapters for something that you like. But once you're into them, you see this whole characteristic of this kind of cowardly, wimpy guy who realizes the beauty of the goddess and transforms himself into the being of light that he is meant to become. Well, then I got kind of hooked on her books and then noticed that she wrote everything that way. She starts with everything very muddy, and then it gets clearer and clearer. Well, then when you read her nonfiction, again, short, not a lot of pages, but given straight, simple directions on esotericism. So easy to read for beginners. And I realized that I could refer beginners to those books and they could get through them. But without any background, you need something that's written a little more simply. And for some of us, a lot of us who are dyslexic, we need the story. The story puts your symbology, it puts a suit on a naked being. So you finally have clothes. There's some reason for the person to be transformed in the way they are because they have something in the story to overcome. And I think that's different. One of my very favorite books of hers is The Secrets of Dr. Tavener. And the reason I like that one is it's about a psychiatrist who uses occult methods to cure his patients. And it's during a time, you can tell that there is actually a real psychiatrist that she worked with and helped with these occult methods to develop a whole psychotherapy that used metaphysical principles for the cure as opposed to Freudian or Jungian or those kinds of things. And I found that fascinating.
Well, also, aren't we looking at one of the functions of the occult teacher to help someone through symbolism and through example, rather than just tell them what to do, finger wagging with moral imperatives, moral judgment, rather the occult way the occult spiritualist way to give someone a process to do which actually leads them into a healing and a successful outcome.
Yeah, give them tools.
Give them tools.
Yeah, because, years ago, when the center was a baby, I remember having this meeting because we put together our own little research group, and we had 4 doctors and a couple psychotherapists and some nurses, and we sat down and realized as we went week after week getting our research ducks in a row that we really hadn't defined healing. So we actually spent a whole Sunday afternoon figuring out what we were going to define healing as. And we defined it as the process the healer took a patient through that gave them the tools to never have a recurrence of their disease. So that if they fell ill again, they already knew the way back out of illness because they'd have enough pieces in the process. Now, that's a very lofty goal that is way beyond probably all of us in every session. But it is a place to put that so that they have psychological tools and intellectual tools as well as physical tools. You can give somebody a diet, you can't make them eat it unless you give them a reason to want to eat it. And so there were all these things that we kept bumping into. So we began grappling with how we were going to transfer this information back into medicine. And once I began that process, don't you know, I found hundreds of cases in medicine in the last 100 years where all of this was in medicine and gradually got taken out. For instance, I don't know if you've recently had a physical, but doctors barely palpate your body anymore for your, doctors used to be taught how to touch the body and diagnose. They're not taught that anymore because they depend on x-rays and MRIs
right.
and CT scans and PET scans, so they don't touch you anymore. They don't even know if your liver's hot, which used to be a basic. You put your hand on the liver, if it's hot, let's get this thing tested. But they don't do that anymore. So what I've been watching is as we've gone technical, we took human out, and now we're trying to find ways to put it back in that may be a little artificial. They may not be the best or most direct way to interact with somebody. And the same might be true with spirituality. It's one of the reasons that I barely preach. I mean, I preach once a year, certainly, and work hard at it and love doing it. And, the older I get, the more I threaten to take the pulpit back and preach every Sunday because I like the process of getting ready for it. I don't particularly like preaching, but I like the study and the preparation and all that stuff. So I think about that every year, every Easter. I think, okay, see how you feel this Easter and see if you want to do more of this. And the truth is, there's not enough interaction in it for me. Mm-hmm. If I had a way in a spiritual service to be in dialogue with the congregation instead of preaching at the congregation, then I would probably be there more than once a week because that would be very interesting to me. But when you're just preaching at people and giving them the basics, you have no way to tell what they were able to take from it.
I'm also wondering about preaching versus teaching.
Well, teaching, you have freedom to talk,
But also, don't you also have the freedom to be more personalized about it.
Yeah.
A sermon or a speech is very impersonal. It's kind of talking at you. Whereas if you teach by example, by inspiration, by deep listening to the people that are in the room, then a whole different conversation occurs. That's that's different from the pulpit.
And the pulpit also, for me, now, again, I'm trained as a spiritualist, but when I step into the pulpit, probably 2 minutes into my being there, I'm channeling. I have all my ducks in a row. I know my topic. I may or may not ever look at my notes. I may or may not be able to find what I'm going to read from. I may not be able to do any of that part. Because once that flow starts, I'm following something. I'm not leading it. That's what makes it successful. But I still miss the dialogue that would make it more personal. When you're channeling that way, you have to trust that those that are there to hear what's being given to them from beyond.
So there's a direct link here, probably, between the books that inspire us from the past, that
Right.
when you read them, often they feel like they came from a medium, from a channel.
Yes.
That's why if you read Alice Bailey doing her writing her books, the tone is different from her autobiography because she's no longer in a medium state. So I'm wondering whether, in addition to reading classical books, we have to kind of assess the level of mediumship that was involved, that these books came from an outside source, or at least were inspired by an outside source.
They absolutely were. And as a trained medium, I can tell you it's hard to channel for that long. It's the length of time. A channel basically can stay clear for just over an hour if they're really well trained and they're really well grounded. If the grounding goes, the message goes wonky. If the room is not receptive, the message goes wonky. There's any number of things that can distract you. And when I was in my training, my children were still toddlers, basically. So you could not keep them from coming into the room while you were doing this, because you can't keep toddlers from doing anything they want to do, if they want to do it enough. So I got to where I was undistractable. And that's what served me as I went on into this. I developed a strength to hang on to the message that many people don't develop. And when I read the channeled material that's produced now, I realize that what's missing from so many of the channeled books that I read is that the medium wasn't trained, didn't have any, I mean, I'm talking about this like it's acting, didn't have the muscles for it. They hadn't done it long enough or thoroughly enough to hang on to the message. They didn't have the discipline to notice when the message drifted and either pull it back or stop.
And perhaps this explains why Alice Bailey is so repetitive, that when you lose focus, you're going to repeat previous material rather than move into new material. And that's the big critique of Bailey, that she keeps saying the same thing over and over again, and we could actually condense her work into a much smaller volume than the one we're given.
You could, but she's also giving it to a group of people. And when you have a group you're teaching, you do repeat. You repeat for others to hear what they missed before.
Definitely.
So that also, because I think that some of this was channeling that a stenographer took down. So she would be repetitive in that way. I'm not trying to make excuses for her. I don't know the material well enough to do that. But I do know that the process can be very, very involved. I mean, it's one of the things I notice. My next workshop, which is just before Easter, no, right after Easter, I guess, I'm teaching the heart and soul. And the reason I put the two together is you can do the physical stuff you do for the heart, but half of what you need for the spiritual part of the heart is spirit itself. You need a real contact with other dimensions to feel full. You need soul, you need spirit, you need something in there. And I find that particularly now, I have to teach half the topic the student thinks they're there to learn. You know, they're there to learn how to treat heart disease, perhaps, or, you know, they have a father that has congestive heart failure, whatever it is. The other half of that is I've got to teach them how to stay full of spirit in order to take on a disease as advanced and difficult as congestive heart failure. How do you get the spiritual stones to stay with somebody who's sick? How do you have that faith? How do you have that much flow? And it has to come you plus everything you channel. The human wouldn't be enough. It has to be you plus everything that you can muster. Anyway, I'm going on and on. Never mind, Dean.
No. I'm doing my best to track it, and I have a little thoughts getting triggered in my tiny little Capricorn Scorpio rising brain. One of them is a little nerdy because Annie Besant wasn't trained as a medium, and yet she was taught by Leadbeater, and her books that she wrote with Leadbeater were very short. You can read The Astral World, you can read all the books they co-wrote, although I strongly suspect Leadbeater wrote most of it, and Besant kind of put some stuff in there, but that's just a thought. But they were short and concise. Now we contrast that with Bailey, even with Paul Blavatsky. We have long tomes that need to be extracted, worked through, which for a modern student is very hard. It's literally like climbing a mountain, like climbing K3. You have to put a lot of preparation to climb the mountain. It's not easy, and you may die halfway up, as you're trying to unpack the material.
Right. Yeah, I think, one of the criticisms I always hear about all the older writers is that they didn't have good editors, but they wouldn't allow them to be edited because it was channeled material. I know how that happens. And I have a couple of notebooks of my own channeled material laying around, and they're not readable. They're not readable. If you transcribe what I'm doing, it doesn't read well. It listens well, but it doesn't read well. And we have a culture that's not particularly auditory, in spite of our love of music and sound. And I think as a culture, we've done more with it than anybody ever thought one could. But it's still not the way we learn. Our primary learning for most people is visual. And so they try to get through it by reading it. She also, one of the things about Besant is she brought Krishnamurti to America and helped set up his foundation here. And he was a great intellectual. So he didn't have much truck with anything that had to do with channeling. They were the ones that went in the intellectual direction with meditation and that form. Krishnamurti was still active here when I was first studying. He had a big center in Ojai, California. And he was very dry and very intellectual. And that was from her influencing him as a very young man. She brought him from India when he was only 15 years old as the next guru that was going to transform the world. And he did a lot to transform the world, I must say. He certainly influenced all things spiritual in the state of California back in the day. This was a place, this is where we had, I just lost his name, the other great meditation teacher. It'll come.
It'll come.
It'll come. If you don't let it go, it won't come, is what I think. It's like catching butterflies. Just don't squeeze your hand. You'll be fine. Thank you. It did come. Yeah, Yogananda was here too.
Yogananda, yes.
Yeah.
Now, of course, like yourself, Dion Fortune, very dedicated to Christianity, even though Theosophy was pushing the world teacher, the combining the spiritual outlook of global religions. Dion Fortune very committed to keeping the spirit of Christianity, that Christ energy, alive. So would you like to branch a little bit into that? Because it does seem relevant in a Western society.
I think it is relevant. For me, it's also personal. When I was first studying and didn't know what I was going to do, I actually had a visitation from Christ. And that shaped my whole mission. It taught me where I was going and what I was going to do. And throughout my career, about every 6 or 7 years, once in a while it's Mary that appears, but more often than not it's Jesus. Just appears for not 3 minutes and tells me what the next mission is. And it's something, when Mary appeared to me in Nazareth many years ago, she said, you will write a book about me, and you will meet the other people writing books about me. There are 7 of them, and you will meet all of them before you die. I've met 6. So this is the superstitious psychic part of all of us. I'm sure I'm not going to die yet because I haven't met the 7th. I know that's silly.
Not silly at all. Not silly at all.
But the message was very, very clear. You will meet all of them before you die. So there's she told me what to do. She told me what I was going to study. She told me, and then the whole world around me changed. The way I was living, where I was living, the way I was teaching. There was a whole upheaval and change, and then we went forward. And that happens every, as I said, 7 to 9 years. Somebody will appear, and it sometimes, in this case, it was actually in the chapel dedicated to her in Nazareth that I had the visit. It could be in my backyard. Several of them have been in my backyard, where I'll be sitting out with the dogs and something will appear. I think that Christianity itself has downplayed the spiritual potential that is hidden within it. I think that Jesus knew what he was channeling. I'm sure that Mary knew what she was channeling. I'm sure the disciples were taught how to channel. And people in some parts of religion still know. In some of the so-called lower forms of Christianity, people still channel and heal and speak in tongues. But it's not as prevalent as it would have been in early Christianity. So I would have to say that my dedication to it is because it is what I actually practice. And I can understand when I'm with other Christians who are frightened by what I do, why they're frightened. The responsibility of it is awesome. It's absolutely awesome. But I understand that that's a difficulty that others would have with this.
I'm delighted you're sharing something so personal as this. And it also, you know, as you're speaking, I'm realizing that these authors that we're talking about, teachers of various kinds, the important ones you could consider, they were contacted by something outside themselves, whether it's a KH or a Mahatma or a great chief, you know, or someone in Tibet. Yes. They were all contacted by someone and inspired. Their lives were inspired and guided by that contact. Yes.
And when you got into being criticized by your fellow humans and your family and your close friends and all that happens, it's like there is spirit at your back saying, what are you afraid of? That somebody's not going to approve of you? What made you think they approved of you to begin with? You know, I read a quote just day before yesterday. It was Churchill, actually, who said that you can find kind people and you can find nice people. It's hard to find courageous people. And I thought, oh my goodness, isn't that where we are again? You can find all these people that want to be good and want to have a spiritual practice and want everything to be nice. But do they have the courage to continue with what they're doing? And then you have this other group of people who seem to have plenty of courage to be obnoxious, but I don't know if they're going to get anything done. That's my biggest gripe about all of it. You know, get something done. Help somebody. Go heal somebody. Go build a victory garden. You know, we need more vegetables, so do that. Whatever it takes that means you're actually engaged. Not just intellectual, not just reading, not just talking.
There's a teacher out there who famously said that his students come to him wanting to change the world and improve things, and he says, "Well, before you do that, go clean your room."
I know. Oh yes, absolutely.
You can't change the world if you don't clean your room first. Take care of your finances and your life first. Yeah. Then you can apply what you know to changing the world.
Right. Yeah, I mean, what would life be like if I passed up this opportunity? I'm living close to my family, not in each other's hair, but close. And there's 4 generations living. How many families can say there are 4 generations living? Not very many.
And you're not even Mexican. You're not even Indian. You don't have that tradition of big families that are close by.
No. Now, when I was a little girl, because I'm a baby boomer, I'm a World War II baby, when my children were born, there were 5 generations alive. And that was as a result of my people being pioneer people and the women marrying relatively young. So my great-grandmother was still alive when I had children. We probably won't make it that far because from my point on, we got further and further apart. So a generation now in our family is between 20 and 30 years, not between 15 and 25 years. So stop. That's her telling me what time it is. I didn't know if you knew this, but greyhounds can tell time.
I know that when greyhounds want to go for a walk or they're hungry, they will let you know.
Yes.
Because they're dog people.
She's just telling me that it's 5 o'clock. And did I forget that it was 5 o'clock? And the answer is it's none of her business. They're bossy. They're bossy.
I'll keep you 5 minutes and then let you go to your dog person to do what you need to do. Is there anything that you would like to pass on either to your students listening to this interview or to people who are interested in studying with you? Is there anything that you could pass on around preparatory reading? What could they read or view that would help them get up to speed when they come to hear you or work with you?
Actually, they can probably still read my book.
Yes.
It's old, but Wheels of Light really will give them some basics so they'll know the language I speak.
Yes.
Which is probably the most important thing, just knowing the language that I speak. And the other is if they want to come and work with me, they need to know that I find everything about the spiritual important and funny. I find it incredibly humorous that we get so serious that we can't enjoy what's to be enjoyed in front of us. Spiritual people are goofy. They act funny, they dress funny, they take themselves seriously when there's nothing serious. They don't take things seriously they should take, and I love to make fun of them because of that. I know it's a character disorder, but I have that character disorder. I love to tease people about these things that they hold so tight that they can't loosen up and let goodness in. And I think that if they want to work with me, they should come prepared to have a little fun and come prepared to work, because we work long hours. I learned a long time ago, when I'm teaching, I learned to work a student over a 12-hour shift because I make them take a nap every day. Why do I do that? Because they get disoriented. People that work in the real world don't take long naps every day. You put them all in a group and you teach them and you feed them and you teach them and then you nap them. And then you feed them and you teach them and you let them go to sleep. That little nap in the afternoon breaks up something of rigidness and helps them change. It's not that I'm changing anybody. It's that the group works on each other and they sleep at the same time. So here you are in a hotel somewhere probably, and you're all sleeping in the same vibration at the same time.
Yes.
And you're all dreaming. And that starts to cook. The energy starts to cook. And that's the thing that I find the most exciting about teaching those 5-day intensives that I love to teach so much. I still do a little lecturing out in the world. I recently was talking at the Beyond Borders conference, which is all the healing touch people.
Yes.
And one of the things I noticed was that they tend to take themselves seriously, particularly intellectually. They have a lot of rules. And it just brought out the worst. I just couldn't stop teasing them because they had so many rules. And it took them a little bit to get used to the fact that I was going to poke fun at them that way. But it was a lot of fun once they got it. And I think a lot of them learned things that they didn't know they already knew because they could laugh at it. So that's my message to the world. Laugh at yourself.
It's a wonderful message. Thank you so much for your time. I know you have a greyhound to walk and massage or whatever else he wants you to do with him. Yes. And for anyone who would like to find out more about Rosaline, you can go to her website, which is rosalynelbruyere.org. And I'll leave a link in the description. And look for a workshop and even perhaps look for a photograph of Rosaline walking the aforementioned greyhound. That would be lovely to see.
You know what? We need to put one on the website. We don't have it. And there's kind of nothing funnier than watching me walk 3 greyhounds with my walking sticks. But anyway, that's a good idea. Thank you so much, Dean. This was fun.
You're very welcome. It was fun. Thank you so much for your time. And
okay.
Have fun. Have fun with your upcoming workshop. Stay healthy.
I will.
But don't look too hard for that last person you're supposed to meet. Okay, don't look too hard.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take good care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.